Sarah Davis thought she knew everything about her husband, Michael, the man she had married, built a family with, and trusted unconditionally. But when a hidden journal and a mysterious plane ticket uncovered a web of lies, an affair, and a life she never imagined, Sarah was thrust into a dark, dangerous world. As Michael's sudden murder shocked their quiet town, Sarah was left to unravel the secrets of his betrayal, discovering a far more sinister truth than she ever could have anticipated. Was his death the tragic end of a doomed marriage, or the result of a deadly game of deceit and betrayal? Sarah and Michael Davis seemed like the ideal couple. Living in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, their life was often the subject of admiration among their friends and acquaintances. Michael, a charismatic lawyer, was well respected in his community, always seen in crisp suits and engaging in lively conversation. Sarah, his high school sweetheart, complemented him perfectly. She had an aura of grace and warmth, and her involvement in local charities made her beloved among their neighbors. Together, they were the embodiment of success and happiness, parents to two young children who brought joy to their lives. Their home was a beautifully decorated haven, the kind of place where everything seemed perfectly in place, from the perfectly manicured lawn to the carefully arranged family portraits on the walls. But things weren't always as perfect as they appeared. For months, Sarah had noticed subtle changes in Michael's behavior. At first, they were small. He started coming home later from work, with excuses about extra hours spent in meetings. He used to be the first one home, eager to spend time with Sarah and the kids. But now it seemed like he was always in a rush to get somewhere, disappearing just after dinner. Sarah told herself it was nothing, just the pressures of work, maybe a particularly demanding case he was working on. After all, Michael had always been a dedicated professional. However, the changes grew more noticeable over time. There were whispers about Michael's behavior at social gatherings. His colleagues mentioned how he seemed distracted, not quite himself. Sarah brushed it off at first, assuming they were exaggerating or making up stories. But deep down, she felt a nagging discomfort she couldn't quite shake. She started noticing things, small signs she couldn't ignore, the scent of perfume on his clothes after he returned home late one evening, the way he was always on his phone, even when he didn't need to be. It wasn't until he cancelled their anniversary dinner, citing an unexpected business trip, that Sarah's instincts kicked into full gear. Despite her suspicions, Sarah tried to maintain her composure. She didn't want to believe the worst about Michael. He was, after all, her high school sweetheart, the man who had promised to love her forever. But a sinking feeling in her chest told her that something wasn't right. She found herself becoming more observant, paying attention to every detail in their lives together. She noticed how he would sometimes answer his phone in another room, speaking in hushed tones. The times when he would disappear for hours on end, with vague explanations about work meetings or client obligations. It was clear that something had changed, but Sarah couldn't pinpoint exactly what was going on. It was around this time that Sarah started to feel increasingly isolated. She spent more time at home taking care of the children, but it felt different. Michael wasn't as present as he once was, and Sarah felt a growing distance between them. The warm and loving connection they had shared for years seemed to slip through her fingers, and she couldn't help but wonder if their once perfect marriage was unraveling. But despite her growing doubts, she clung to the belief that their bond was strong, that Michael would eventually return to the man he had once been. Then one night, while cleaning out the desk in their home office, Sarah came across an old, leather-bound journal tucked into a drawer. It was unfamiliar to her, its edges worn and faded with age. She opened it, flipping through the pages, and as she read, her heart sank. It wasn't just any journal. It was a collection of personal thoughts, reflections, and confessions. The words were familiar, too familiar. They were her own words, written years ago, chronicling the inner turmoil she had kept hidden from the world. She had forgotten about this journal, but somehow Michael had kept it. And as Sarah read further, she realized he had read it too. The journal held her darkest secrets, fears about their relationship, her insecurities about being enough for him, and the growing sense of doubt that had begun to take root in her heart. Michael had been reading her thoughts all along, possibly using them to manipulate and control her in ways she hadn't understood. She felt exposed, betrayed, and violated. The trust she had placed in him. As Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the journal still open in front of her, the weight of her discovery pressed heavily on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that settled deep within her. The journal had once been a private outlet for her innermost thoughts, a place where she had poured out her doubts, fears, and dreams. But now, it was clear that Michael had been reading it all along, using her own emotions to shape his behavior, perhaps even guiding his actions in subtle, manipulative ways. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The sudden coldness, the late nights, the unexplained absences. He had been aware of her insecurities, her struggles, and perhaps he had used that knowledge to distance himself from her, all while hiding his own secrets. The journal was not just a reflection of Sarah's private thoughts. It was a roadmap of the unraveling of their marriage. The last few entries, dated just weeks before, were the most disturbing. One entry in particular stood out. Sarah had written about feeling like she was losing herself in their relationship, questioning whether Michael was truly faithful or whether he was hiding something. At the time, she had dismissed the feeling, rationalizing it as a product of her own mind working overtime. But now, as she reread the words, the pieces began to fall into place. Michael had been aware of her suspicions, and he had done nothing to reassure her. In fact, he had been growing more distant, more preoccupied with whatever he was hiding, as if he were pushing her away to cover up his own secrets. What troubled Sarah the most was the realization that Michael had not only read her thoughts, but he had manipulated her, responding to her insecurities in ways that only deepened the gap between them. He had been hiding something, a truth she wasn't yet ready to face, but one that she couldn't ignore any longer. The affair. It had to be the only explanation. His sudden absences, the change in his demeanor, the lies, the unexplained phone calls. Sarah knew in her gut that her suspicions were right. He had been seeing someone else. But as she stared at the journal, she couldn't help but feel a sense of confusion and disbelief. How could she have been so blind? She had always trusted Michael. They had built a life together, had children together, shared dreams, and made plans for the future. Now it felt like everything was crumbling in front of her. The perfect life she had thought they were living was nothing more than a facade. Her hands trembled as she closed the journal, the leather binding now feeling cold and alien in her grip. She couldn't just sit back and ignore the truth any longer. She had to know what Michael was up to. The realization that she had been kept in the dark for so long made her feel like a fool, but it also sparked something in her, a determination to uncover the truth. Sarah knew she couldn't keep living this way. in a marriage built on lies and manipulation. But what was she supposed to do next? Confront him directly? Or dig deeper and find out more about what was really happening? That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Michael, so calm and collected, began to fade into something darker. The man she had once loved seemed like a stranger to her now. She found herself replaying moments from their past, the quiet dinners, the family vacations, and wondering how much of it had been real. Was he ever truly the man she had married? Or had she been blind to the truth from the beginning? Determined to find answers, Sarah decided to take action. The next day, she started to look for clues, anything that could confirm her worst fear. She searched through Michael's things, her heart pounding as she rifled through his personal belongings. She found nothing overtly incriminating at first, just more of the same. A suit jacket hanging in the closet, a stack of legal briefs on his desk. But then her eyes caught something unexpected. Hidden inside a folder, tucked between documents, was a plane ticket. It was for a flight to another city, scheduled for the following week. Sarah's heart raced as she stared at the ticket. Michael had never mentioned any upcoming trips. Was this just another business trip, or was there more to it? The nagging suspicion in her gut grew stronger, more insistent. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't just an innocent work trip. It was a sign that Michael was hiding something, and now she had to know what it was. The ticket was the first piece of a much bigger puzzle, and Sarah wasn't about to let it go. She had come too far to turn back now. With a heavy sigh, she set the ticket down and began to plan her next move. She knew one thing for certain: nothing would be the same after this. The lies, the secrets, the betrayal, everything she thought she knew about her life was about to come crashing down. But Sarah was ready. She had to be. The truth was out there, and she wasn't going to rest until she found it. The discovery of the plane ticket was just the beginning. Sarah's mind raced as she contemplated her next move. The feeling of betrayal was suffocating, and yet she couldn't deny that she had a sense of urgency now. The more she thought about Michael's behavior and the journal she had uncovered, the clearer it became that his affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a pattern, a deliberate deception that had been going on for far longer than she had imagined. The plane ticket, the late nights, the phone calls, the change in his demeanor. It all pointed to one thing. Michael was seeing someone else, and this trip was more than just a business endeavor. For the next few days, Sarah kept her distance from Michael. She continued to play the role of the dutiful wife, but every moment felt like a performance. Every smile, every glance, every conversation with him felt hollow. She could see through the facade now. The once genuine affection she had for him seemed distant, clouded by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Every time he left the house, Sarah felt a knot in her stomach, wondering if he was on his way to meet her, Jessica, the woman who had somehow crept into their lives unnoticed. The more she observed, the more she began to realize that Michael had grown more comfortable with his lies. He seemed to think she wouldn't catch on, that she would never suspect him of cheating. His excuses became more elaborate, his answers more rehearsed. He claimed the trip to the other city was crucial for a client, one that would bring in a major case. But Sarah had heard those words too many times before, and now they felt hollow, like a thin veil over something much darker. Her mind was working overtime, trying to piece together every fragment of information, every conversation she had overheard, every odd detail she had noticed. On the day Michael was scheduled to leave for his trip, Sarah decided to follow him. She couldn't just sit back and wait for him to come back with more lies. She needed the truth, and if that meant shadowing him, then so be it. She told herself it was for her own peace of mind, but deep down, she knew it was about uncovering the secrets that had been lurking beneath the surface of their marriage for so long. When Michael left the house that afternoon, Sarah waited a few minutes before quietly slipping out the door. She kept a safe distance as she followed him in her car, making sure he didn't notice her presence. The drive was nerve-wracking, her palms sweaty as she gripped the steering wheel. She couldn't help but wonder what she would find when they reached their destination. What would happen if she confronted him? Could she even trust her own instincts anymore? After all, she'd been married to him for over a decade. How could she have missed the signs? Michael drove out of town, heading towards a small motel on the outskirts of the city. Sarah's heart dropped as she saw him pull into the parking lot. This wasn't a business trip. This wasn't just a client meeting. Michael was meeting someone he didn't want Sarah to know about. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him step out of the car and walk towards the entrance of the motel. He looked around quickly, as if making sure no one was watching before entering the building. Sarah's mind spun. The motel was a cheap, run-down place, a stark contrast to the life Michael had presented to her. It felt like a hidden world, one where their carefully crafted image didn't belong. She sat in her car, frozen, not sure what to do next. Was she really about to follow him inside? Was this the moment when everything would come crashing down? Her heart pounded in her chest, but she knew she had to see it through. She couldn't go back now. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the motel. She tried to steady her nerves, telling herself she was doing this for her own sanity. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She reached the door of the motel and hesitated for a moment, looking around to make sure no one was watching. The days following Sarah's discovery felt like they dragged on in an endless, suffocating haze. The reality of what she had uncovered about Michael was hard to process. Every time she thought about him meeting Jessica, a wave of betrayal hit her, sharp and unforgiving. The image of them together, laughing, talking, so at ease with each other, played over and over in her mind. The comfortable intimacy they shared only made Sarah's own feelings of isolation more intense. Michael had been living a life full of secrets, and she had been completely blind to it. The next morning, Sarah tried to act normal. She made breakfast for the kids, smiled at them as they played, and tried to keep up the facade of a happy mother and wife. But nothing felt normal anymore. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Michael and Jessica. The motel, the secret meetings, the way Michael looked at Jessica. It all made her skin crawl. She couldn't bear the thought of confronting him yet. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. Would he admit to it? Would he be apologetic? Or would he double down on his lies, denying everything? But one thing Sarah was sure of was that she couldn't continue living in this toxic, deceitful environment. She couldn't ignore the growing ache in her chest, the constant fear that Michael would come home and lie to her again, pretend everything was fine, while he was seeing someone else. The weight of the lies he had built around their marriage had become unbearable. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about how deep the deception had run, how much she had trusted him, and how easily he had betrayed that trust. Then, one afternoon, as she was cleaning up the kitchen, Sarah received a phone call. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but calm. "Is this Sarah Davis?" the voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" Sarah replied, her heart beginning to race. "This is Detective Taylor from the local police department," the voice continued. "We need to speak with you about your husband, Michael Davis." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her first instinct was to ask what had happened, but she forced herself to remain composed. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "We've found your husband's car," Detective Taylor said. "It was parked near the woods just outside of town. There's been an incident. We need you to come down to the station." An icy chill spread through Sarah's body. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them good. Was Michael hurt? Had something happened during one of his secret meetings? Could this be connected to Jessica? The questions bombarded her, but one thing was clear. Her world was about to shatter even further. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her purse and quickly made her way out the door, her thoughts spinning wildly. She drove to the police station, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it was connected to everything she had uncovered about Michael. As she parked outside the station, she felt a sense of dread settle over her. She knew this was the moment when the truth would finally come crashing down. When Sarah walked into the station, she was immediately escorted to a small room. Detective Taylor was waiting for her, his face grim. The silence in the room felt oppressive as Sarah took a seat, her hands shaking slightly in her lap. "Miss Davis," the detective began, "we've found your husband's body." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. "What?" she whispered, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. "What do you mean?" "Michael's dead," Detective Taylor nodded. "Yes. His body was discovered in the woods late last night. There's evidence of foul play, and we're treating it as a homicide." Sarah's mind went blank. The room seemed to close in around her as she struggled to process the words. Michael was dead. The man she had married, the father of her children, was gone. And he had been murdered. But by who? And why? Her thoughts spiraled. Was this connected to the affair? Had Jessica been involved? Had Michael's secret life finally caught up with him in a way that Sarah couldn't have anticipated? She thought about the motel, the meetings, the lies, and suddenly everything felt even more sinister. Could Michael's actions have led to something far darker than she had imagined? Detective Taylor's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to ask you some questions, Miss Davis. We understand this is difficult, but we need to know everything. Do you have any idea who might want to hurt your husband? Any enemies? Anyone who could be involved in this?" Sarah's mind raced. She thought about Michael's colleagues, his clients, and even Jessica. She thought about the journal, the way he had been reading her most private thoughts. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, and for the first time, she wondered if she had been living in a nightmare that was only now beginning to unravel. But who could have done this? And why? The truth, it seemed, was just as elusive as it had ever been. As Sarah sat there in that small room, the reality of her life began to sink in. Michael's murder was only the beginning of the answers she desperately sought. The question now was, How deep did this go? And how far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? The days following Michael's death were a blur for Sarah. Her emotions were a mixture of numbness and disbelief, like she was living in a world that wasn't quite real. The police investigation into his murder began almost immediately, but the more they uncovered, the more questions were raised. Sarah felt like she was drowning in a sea of confusion, trying to make sense of her husband's death, the secrets he had kept, and the strange feelings that had plagued her long before she knew about the affair. The detective, Taylor, kept in regular contact with Sarah, asking her questions about Michael's life, his work, and his relationships. She had already told him about the affair she had discovered, and it was clear that the police were considering it as a possible motive for the crime. Yet, there were things Sarah still didn't understand. Who could have wanted Michael dead? Had the affair escalated to something more dangerous, or was there something deeper, darker, that no one, including herself, had ever suspected? The investigation turned up surprising leads. One was a series of strange phone calls Michael had received in the weeks leading up to his death. The calls were mostly brief, but it was clear they had been important. The phone records showed no obvious connection to any of Michael's clients, friends, or business associates. The calls were from a private number, one that had been carefully hidden from view. Sarah's mind raced as she wondered if the calls were related to Jessica. But then, just when she thought she was beginning to piece things together, another discovery rocked her even further. Detective Taylor visited Sarah one afternoon with a grim expression on his face. He had something important to tell her, something that would change everything. As Sarah sat down with him, the room felt heavy with the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "We've found something, Ms. Davis," Detective Taylor began. "Something in Michael's office. There were more documents, files we didn't initially look through. Among them we found a series of emails, some with a woman named Jessica." Sarah's stomach turned, her heart pounding. She had already known about Jessica, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the depth of Michael's secrets. The emails were shocking. They weren't just personal messages or love notes. They detailed something far more sinister. Michael had been involved in a business deal, something illegal. He had been working with Jessica, but it wasn't the affair Sarah had thought it was. Jessica wasn't just a lover. She was part of a dangerous scheme. Michael had been laundering money for a criminal organization, and it appeared that Jessica was his partner in crime. As Sarah absorbed this new information, her mind raced to put the pieces together. Could Michael's double life have finally caught up with him? Was his murder connected to something he had done that went far beyond infidelity? But there was more. But there was more. The investigation into Michael's finances revealed large, unexplained transfers of money, all funneled through anonymous accounts. The money trail led to shady businesses and individuals with criminal backgrounds. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that Michael hadn't just been unfaithful to her in a romantic sense. He had been betraying her in a much deeper, more dangerous way. He had been hiding a life filled with lies, not just to her, but to everyone around him. As the police began to uncover the full extent of Michael's criminal activities, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, grief, disbelief. It was as if her entire world had been upended. She had loved Michael, trusted him, and built a life with him, only to discover that the man she had known and married was someone entirely different. The betrayal felt all-encompassing. But even as the truth of Michael's actions began to unfold, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his death than just a betrayal of trust. Who had killed him? And why? It became clear that Michael's secrets had put him in a dangerous position, but the real question remained. Had someone from his criminal dealings decided to silence him for good? Or was Jessica herself involved? In a way Sarah could never have predicted. Detective Taylor continued to pursue leads, but every new revelation seemed to raise even more questions. The investigation had only scratched the surface of the dark world Michael had been living in, and Sarah knew that there was much more to uncover. But with each step forward, the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare grew stronger. Her once perfect life, the life she had fought so hard to protect, was now a hollow shell of what it had been. As Sarah sat in her quiet home, surrounded by memories of a life that now seemed like a lie, she understood one painful truth. She would never fully understand everything that had happened. The murder of Michael, the affair, the hidden criminal activities. It was all so much more complicated than she had ever imagined. The only thing she knew for certain was that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was gone, and she was left to piece together the shattered remnants of her life, knowing that some truths were too dark to fully comprehend.